Keeping our old identity. Now, in lesson 4, right? This is lesson 7, but in lesson 4, we talked about Jacob becoming Israel. We talked about how God met him in a place. Finally, he quit running, and the process that it took Jacob to get to Israel. And God finally had to change his name, and there was a shift, and he had to get out of what was planted inside him, of what heel grabber and all these things that was put into his life, and he had finally get out of that and say, no, you're no longer this, you're this. Right. So we're not going to go into that, but we're going to still keep on a name change thought process, okay? So my opening scripture is Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king set to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Now, here, in these next couple scriptures, we're not going through them because of time, but these next couple scriptures, Nebuchadnezzar gives his stipulations. God has allowed him to take over. He's taken captives, we know, Daniel and all them. So now he's trying to implement Babylonian culture, right? So now he says, look, I made this image, right? You're going to hit all this music, right? The music starts, I want you all to bow. Should bow to this image and worship it, right? So during this exchange, everyone bows besides 3 Hebrew boys, right? Jumping to verse 12. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. Now we get to a point to where the 3 Hebrew boys get another chance. Nebuchadnezzar's like, all right, maybe you didn't understand me correctly. Maybe communication was bad. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you another chance. Maybe you couldn't hear the timbers and the trumpets. Maybe you couldn't hear any of it. So here I'm going to give you another chance. It's going to happen again. Now you have another chance to do it. Okay? And then, okay, here we go. Are you ready? All right? Now we jump to verse 16. So Nebuchadnezzar's telling them all of this. Say, look, here's what's going to happen. Okay? It happens. They don't do it. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. So, the 3 Hebrew boys stand up to the king, right? The Bible doesn't say anybody else did it. Here we got 3 Hebrew boys that said, look, king, I'm sorry, but we're not going to do this. Now, this is going to be my launching pad for tonight, okay? There's no set in stone truth to the age of the 3 Hebrew boys. Most scholars say they were at the age from 12 to 15. Nothing set in stone. That's just what it is assumed that their age was, okay? So they're 12 to 15. Let's say 15 and give them the benefit of the doubt. 12 to 15 is a huge age difference as far as maturity. Should be. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They're obviously mature enough because Nebuchadnezzar took them and put them over things. Okay? We read that. Okay? So they had to have had something that Nebuchadnezzar liked, or they had gifts in something. Right? So we get to these 15-year-old boys. All right, and what does Nebuchadnezzar try to do? He tries to accustom them to the Babylonian culture. Okay, now, did you know, Ron's going to be like, yeah, so Ron, you don't count. But did you know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego aren't their names? That's not their names. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar changed their names to assimilate them to the Babylonian culture, right? Their Hebrew names, Daniel 1, verse 6. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belshazzar, and unto Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael, yes, I'm trying to play through them on my head with all these names, and to Azariah Abednego. Now, isn't it just like the enemy to try and change their names? They were Hebrews. He's like, no, I don't like your Hebrew names. I need to accustomate you to my culture. I'm going to change your name, though. So we know that the three Hebrew boys, we know the story, right? And they say, oh, king, you can change our name, but that doesn't change who we are. You can change everything around us. You can change our culture. You can change what we do, but we still won't worship your gods. Doesn't matter what you do. Oh, king, you can do anything you want. You can do whatever you want, but we are so set with our identity and who we are, nothing you do will make us compromise that. Now, we know that these boys had faith in God. Right? There's no question about it. They said, look, you could do it. Our God will protect us. But even if he doesn't, even if he allows us to die, he's still my God. That's right. So I kind of have mixed feelings because I can point this in two different aspects, right? I can say that we don't have faith in our God like we do today, if this were to happen today. Okay, this is a very rare occurrence that we have in Christians. I use the term lightly, okay? But people who should be Christ-like, people who proclaim things, we can say that it's hard to find this in people. I think we could agree with that. Now, you can also turn it to the other side. I would say this particular aspect was a revolt against their quote-unquote religion. Okay? I would classify this instance as a persecution against the Christians or church. That's how I would, so we can classify it as a church or religion persecution, or you can classify it as a personal persecution. Now there's two avenues because it's different when the church gets persecuted compared to when we get persecuted personally. It's easy to fight a cause when there's persecution against the church. That's easy. What is that? We can look at today's society. We can see that there's persecution against the church. It's just an idea that goes against our idea. It's easy for when the world says something that contradicts ours, it's easy for the church to say, no, that's wrong. In general, okay, it's easy when someone says abortion, the church is pretty good about saying no, right? These are persecutions against the whole body itself, right? This is easy to back up because we have enough people that we can hide behind. We could agree with the church because we're part of a bigger community. It's easy. It's easy when you got 100 people and 100 people agree compared to you got one person agreeing, right? That's easy to do. It's not hard to not follow the church. That's easy. What's hard is when that persecution comes to your own house. It's then when you begin to bow. You don't bow when the persecution comes against the church. That's easy. But when the persecution gets to your home, that's when you typically bow. Because you don't have people around you. You can't have people because it's a battle within your family. It's a battle within you. It's not a church persecution. It's a persecution inside of you. And that's typically when you see people bowing. Because it's easy to hide behind a bunch of people. That's easy. You don't have to have much faith. You don't even have to really believe a whole lot. Yeah, I agree with the church. This is wrong. Oh, okay, there's really no persecution against you. But when it comes to you personally, that's a whole different aspect. There you go. Now, if these boys were 15, right, and their culture gets shifted and they tried to get into Babylonian culture, and the enemy, Nebuchadnezzar, an enemy, is trying to change their names, trying to get rid of their identity and give them a new identity. And why is that? The enemy wants to get us at a young age. That way we grow up with that identity, right? We know that an ox gets yoked from a very young age. Now, we're not going into that, but seeds get sown into our childhood. Right. That is when the enemy does it the most. Period. The enemy wants to yoke you when you're small, because if you can get that yoke part of your childhood, then part of your teenage years, then young adult years, that yoke is a lot harder to break. So seeds get planted. One could argue that every adult issue stems from a childhood issue. If you're doing something as an adult, it's possible, more than likely, that a seed was planted somewhere in your life that has now manifested itself in the adulthood. Right? What happens with our childhood, right? Our childhood, it's the earliest definition. It's normally our childhood and what influences us. Right? More clearly, it's really who raises us. Right? Very rarely does a person graduate from the primary caregiver, parental structure, or whatever its actual birth parents may be, or adoptive parents, or extended family. It is very rare that a person goes outside that structure and leaves it. Why? Because that family structure, that family mindset has been yoked with them at such a young age. By the time they get to adulthood, that's all they know. Good or bad. We're not just talking about bad things, we're talking about good things too, right? So just about every parent thinks that their child is the bread and butter of something, right? Parents argue all the time and bicker between each other. Well, my kid's the best at this, and they'll scribble something that looks terrible, but we act like it's... I was trying to think of a famous artist, Michelangelo. We think that it's just $1 million painting and it's crayons that they scribble. It's not that pretty. It's not. But because they're our child, and because we have we have something special with them, we feel other people should see it as beauty. Then, okay, that's kind of what we do as parents, right? And we sometimes do it intentionally and unintentionally, right? But there are other factors that plays into parenting, putting their children in unhealthy predicaments and teaching them bad habits. Sometimes teaching them something that knowing it's wrong, but because they want their child to think the same way they do. So what do? They teach a child that same way and teach it this way. They know it's wrong, but they don't want that child to grow up and know any different. Right? Because when we were children, we didn't pick our parents. Right? You didn't determine where you were born and what you looked like. You didn't determine your predisposition, right? You didn't determine your DNA, what family blood goes through your veins. You didn't determine on if someone was addicted to something before you got there, if someone was fighting against something before you got there. You didn't get any of that. You got birthed into a family where seeds had already been sown into your life, because iniquity, generational curses, flow through the blood and pass from each generation. So you're doomed to start with. Not only that, but you're born of sin. You're born of the kingdom of darkness, right? So all these things in our childhood mold us. They make us into who we will become. Good or bad, doesn't matter. Now, oftentimes what will happen is we get molded and something horrible will happen in our life, and we take that horrible season and we keep holding on to it, and we even may forget about it until 10, 15, 20 years later, and now all of a sudden that cycle comes back and we're like, what is this? I didn't know I was dealing. What's going on? And little did you know that it was just a cycle, but you didn't remember that thing. And our past, the things that the enemy sows into our life, are not part of your identity. Our identity is not tied up in what other people see and how they perceive you. It's not who your identity's in. If something or someone speaks something over and over again into your life, we begin to believe it even if it's false. Many of us, I would say most of us, are shaped by the words people have been given to us who have been in authority and power over us. Family dynamics are significant, and their influence are critical to a child's life. So if I'm born a certain way, if pastor instills in me something, typically, if he has raised me that way, that mindset will be hard for me to leave. Because he has, in a sense, yoked me, right? So let's say, unintentionally, let's say, hypothetical people, okay? This is just hypothetical, okay? I'm even half tempted not even to use this analogy, but we're going to use it. Hypothetical, not real, okay? Let's say pastor, when I was a child, let's say he was a stealer, right? And he stole. And he may have not have told me, but he said, hey, Chad, go and do this and steal it. Go and do this and steal it. He's not really, all right, Chad, here's how you don't do this, right? And years, and I see him do it. And he says, hey, it's okay, go ahead and do this. Go ahead. And years, what I have now been yoked into a stealing mindset. And it's hard for me to break that mindset because that is what an authority figure has put me into. Okay, so let's flip it. Let's say every night, pastor reads the Bible. Since I was a child, every night we read a verse, we read a verse, we read a verse. As a child, my mind is getting yoked into a scripture and saying, okay, well, it's normal when I'm 30. Well, why do you read scripture at bed? Well, that's just what I've always been taught to do, so that's what I do. I've been yoked from birth all the way up. It's the same thing. Religious and non-religious aspects, right? When we talked about the kingdom, right? What we're talking about. Why does nobody talk about this? Why does no one know this? Because we're so set in a religion, and if we speak against religion, we are going against what has always been taught to us. So therefore, we don't accept it because we have this first knowledge. Categories. Even when the family influence is good, right? We still live in a society, in a world that tries to put labels and categories on us from our very birth. We talked about this with citizenship a little bit. While categories are helpful, they're limited. Categories are just simply categories. It doesn't define you, but it kind of groups you into a certain area. our reliance on them can cause us to get confused. Now, to be fair, categories in themselves aren't wrong. Categories aren't wrong. Labels really aren't wrong. They help us with certain aspects, right? They help us in categories of our occupation, right? They help us with relationships and family and geographical and how do we communicate, right? I may be a learner that has to do something. You can read a book. That's a category that helps us define how do I learn. So categories by themselves help us. Well, okay, you could do a category of this age group and this age group. Well, that age group has the same, in a sense, the same ideas, the same. So it's easier to accustomate yourself to them compared to someone 2 generations past. It's just a category. Now, the problem comes with categories is when they do more than just put you in a category. But it's when we ask that category to hold who we are. Right? Because what are we doing? We're trying to stuff complicated people, diverse people, fully formed beings into a small, inanimate category. So we shouldn't be surprised when we feel tight and cramped inside that limited category. Because any shift in that category will destabilize our sense of self. And what happens when that category goes away? Or what happens when that category doesn't turn out like we're supposed to? What happens when the marriage ends or it never happened in the first place? What happens when we're laid off or we fail in the marketplace? What happens when don't know or we're not good at motherhood or fatherhood? If it doesn't come easy, when we get put in these categories, we've invested a sense of ourself into these categories to say, okay, this category says who I am. So we put all of our whole being into this category. Now what happens when that category gets smashed? We don't know what to do because we've put our whole being inside that category, and when that category lies to us, we step back and say, I don't know who I am. What's going on? This is who I was supposed to be. That's what happened. Categories are good. But when you let your life define you in that category will fail you eventually. That's when we enter a crisis of identity. For without them, how will we know our sense of purpose, calling, and direction? Life will become meaningless and empty. Why? Because we've put our whole being in something that was temporal. And when that temporal thing goes away, we don't know what to do. Once that category or label fails, we feel everything we put ourselves in is no more. To cope, because of that, many are tempted to do this, do that, engage in this and engage in that, and risk other aspects of their life because they feel they have no more identity. They risk other things. They risk a marriage. They risk a relationship. They risk a career because something that they put their whole being in has failed, so now they don't know what to do, and now everything is affected. But if we look below the surface, we'll most likely discover that we've somehow began to center ourself on something. Could be our children. We could have put our identity into our children. We could have put our identity into our family. I've heard numerous number of times that, well, I'm this way because of my family. Well, this is who my family is, and this is just who we are. And that's the perfect example of they've been yoked into that family, and they don't have the mindset or capacity to say, I don't have to be like this. But they've been so yoked since childhood, and words have been spoken over them that they don't think there's any other way. Even theological beliefs. Okay, I'm pretty good about relationship versus religion. If you haven't noticed that already, we have indoctrinated religion. We've indoctrinated rituals. We've indoctrinated just to do things because that's what we're told to do. We're told to go to church on Sundays. We're told to go to church on a midweek service. It's what we're told to do. So we follow these instead of building a relationship and having a desire to say, I don't go because of a ritual. I go because I want to be around my brothers and sisters. I want to be uplifted. I want to get a word from God. We don't have that mindset. We have, okay, it's Sunday. The thing to do is let's just go to church. That's the thing to do. Decisions about these things, when we put our whole identity into something that's not supposed to be, we will end up feeling personal. It will be personal when it gets attacked. Right? If we've invested our identity into something, our wholeness is so deeply rooted into a category, into a religion, into something, when that thing gets challenged, we argue it and we hold it to the highest standard and defend it even if it's false, because it's such a part of our core. When I talk about the religious aspect and rituals, that's what's been driven inside of us, inadvertently, maybe. But still, when we talk about other things, it's hard because it's like, man, Chad, you're going against everything I've been taught. Yeah. And it's hard because that's part of our core. It's even if it's based off of a lie, because it's such a part of us, because we've developed our life around that lie, to uproot that lie would to say my whole life has been a lie. And we don't want to admit that if we're 60 years old and we've lived a lie for 60 years, we don't want to admit that, because what's happened? I've wasted 60 years of my life with something I would rather live this lie, because that's so who I am, than believe the truth, because I can't accept 60 years of my life as a lie. That's why it's so hard to convince people of things. That's why it's hard for us as the church to go out to a world that's been yoked since childhood, that has had nothing good spoken over their life, that has been told you are worthless, that has been told you don't mean anything, that has been told all of these negative traits, and we as a church think we're just going to go out there and say, here it is, and they're going to say, okay, you're right? That's not how they've been yoked. Same thing with the girl with pink hair, pink and blue hair that I talked about. There's things inside of that young girl. There's reasons why she acts the way she does. She's been yoked. So it's our job to understand that and say, all right, your whole life has been a lie. So what we got to do is we really just simply need to get them somehow to Jesus, because Jesus will fix it all. He's the fixer-all. God He just does it all. He'll work on that inside. But that's why it's so hard when you argue theological beliefs. A perfect example. Pastor and Ron, when they discuss end time, okay? Perfect example, right? Brother Ron has a belief on his end time. Pastor has his belief on end time. You get these two different ideologies coming against each other. Well, neither one wants to back down, because because Ron's put his life into this, Pastor's put his life into this. And because they're different, it's hard for either one to agree, because that would mean what I have been taught is a lie. That's just an example. That's why it's so hard to argue doctrinal beliefs. It's hard to do that, because that argument's not going to do anything. It may on a rare occasion, but for the majority, it's not going to do anything. These things of, here we go, I'm really going to hit it now. I'm really going to hit it now. These things we see them all the time, right? Categories, right? What actor do you look like? Well, I'm talking about Facebook here. What Disney princess is your personality? You guys know what I'm talking about. I'm sure we all have friends that's all they do is there's some personality test that is just off the wall, and it's like, what is your character? We all know it. Come on now. Don't make it sound like I'm the only one who sees this stuff. What animal are you? We see. Now, we are laughing, but the sad part is you have no idea how much these people put their identity into that. Now, some of these tests are actually good, right? Some of them have good benefits, right? Personality tests, actual personality. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Well, that can be a big deal because that may explain why you act the way you do. If you're an introvert, well, okay, I don't like people. Well, if you're an extrovert, I love everybody. And so there are things that are good. There are tests that, okay, well, I learned by actually doing it, right? Someone else learns by reading it. Someone else learns by and there's good things that come with it. But then there's other things that they're just dumb. Okay? They're they are. And on a side note, nothing to do with my message. Look, do not click on those. Cybersecurity person speaking now, those are not good for your security for your Facebook. Don't do them, okay? There's reasons why they're so popular because people click them and that's how they get stuff. Don't do it. All right, teacher mode now, cybersecurity's no more. So this suggestion may flourish when you act in your own intuition rather than making a rational conclusion based on information, right? We know, hopefully you're not basing your life on what Disney princess personality you are. Hopefully you're not. But I'm sure there are some people. Perfect example. Astrology, right? Our zodiac signs. There are people who base their life just because of what their zodiac sign is. That is not your identity. Hear me, Facebook. Zodiac signs are not your identity. That is not who you are. But that's why we have an identity crisis. Because of these minute things that the enemy tries to put in our way to masquerade and defer us to who we truly are. As I said, some of these tests can have value. Some can pinpoint a weakness and strength, and that's good to know. What am I strong in? What is my weakness? Especially when it comes to a career, right? So some of these are good, but they can never define who you are. They shouldn't. Whether your personality is to be an introvert or an extrovert, sensory or intuitive, rational or emotional, anything else, only God can authoritatively declare who you are. That's it. Nothing else should determine your identity. Nothing. You should not base your life off anything else than who God says you are. In these communities, we can be encouraged and helped by other people who share the same interests, right? So by taking tests that, okay, I'm like these, but we get in trouble when we believe the most important relationships are with the people we've selected for ourselves. Unlike our self-chosen communities, our church. It's a sad day when we can say, well, my work people, my coworkers understand me more than my church people. That means you have put your identity in your coworkers more than you have people who you've chosen, more than people who God has chosen for you. No one at church gets me, but everybody at work does. If you say that, you have believed a lie. Because you have chosen that. Your church, God chose for you. In a sense, again, there's a reason why you're here. There's a reason why people are planted in other churches, not just ours. Those other communities might be naturally comfortable, but they are not your ultimate identity. Now, as we know, this world and the upcoming generations coming forth are very confused. You don't have to look far to see the confusion. And they don't know they're confused. I don't think it is their fault, to be honest. They're confused not just in one thing, but in multiple things. And instead of what it used to be, right, people used to get most of it right and they'd get a few things wrong. Now it's flipped. Now people get most of it wrong and very little right. And identity has been lost in life itself. And this goes beyond spiritual and a relational sense. Okay, this goes beyond just your relationship with God, but just your identity in general with your family, even in your career, whatever it may be. And I don't believe it's that generation's fault. I don't believe it is rebellion, although there is a stem of rebellion. Okay, I believe the church has failed at telling people their identity. I solely believe that it is the church's fault on why we have the identity crisis, because the church never talks about it. The church doesn't tell who they are and who they can become. There's one of the preachers that I listen to, he has a quote and he says, "Wherever the pulpit is silent, the people suffer." If the church doesn't know, they're operating in ignorance. So I squarely put our identity crisis on the church. It's the church's fault. It's not the enemy's fault. It's not our flesh's fault. It's the church's, because if the church would talk about it, we would get knowledge and truth about it. But instead, because the church doesn't talk about it, the enemy comes in and says, all right, the church don't want to tell them who they are. I'll give them a lie. And because they don't know any better, they're going to operate in darkness, ignorance, things that they do not know. And remember, the enemy can only operate in what you don't know. So if the church doesn't speak it, and the enemy has full reign in it. Right? We have a society that says, well, if you don't know who you are, because there's no direction from the church, right? The church is good about some things, but they're terrible at other things. Because they're not telling you, just pick whatever you want to be. It's your life. Pick whatever you want to identify with. It's your life. It's your choice. Just pick something, and if you're not happy with it, well, then abandon it and pick something that you do like. It doesn't matter what it is. It's your life. You choose your own identity. So now we have this lie circulating. Not just one generation, really not 2 generations, but really 3 generations, and going to a 4th. And it's whatever you want to be. You can identify as whatever you want. And because of that, we will okay it, and we will say, okay, if that's how you want to identify, we accept that because it's your life. So we have this lie, and that's why fatherhood has been attacked. There's reasons why families are being torn apart and twisted into chaos. It's because if the enemy can disrupt the family and the identity that can only come from a married man and a married woman, if that's not there, that identity can't be given. If the identity can get stripped from a child who doesn't know a father, then there are certain traits that child will be dysfunctional in because there was no function of a father in the life. There was no father to bring function, so now that child operates in dysfunction. Identity can fade and get lost when you stop talking to the thing that God has given you. I talked a long time ago. I don't even know if Brother Dave was here then. But I talked a long time ago about the exposure our kids get and what exposes them. And things that they get exposed to by the parents, by us, that we may have allowed purposely or allowed unintentionally. Things that we thought were harmful, but they're really not. And we have these things that a child gets sown into their life, and they have no idea how to process this information that they get thrown at. A child's mind doesn't know how to process some of the things that they see, some of the things that most adults can't even process it, let alone a child. So we get these seeds planted inside, and all this is going on in their mind, and they don't know how to process it. They don't know what to do, and they grow up in this bondage that almost seems impossible to break because that's all they've known, and no one told them how it should be and how it shouldn't be. And I seen this, and I was confused, and now because I seen that, I opened the door, and now I have something inside me that I don't like, but I don't know how to get rid of it. And now I'm 30, but I can't tell anybody about it because I've had it since I've been 10, and if I tell someone about it, then now I'm exposing myself and telling them what I struggle with. So we have this wound that never healed. And we hide it because we don't even know how to bring it to light. We don't know how to tell someone we were molested at this age or this happened at that. We don't know. We've hid it for 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And it's just something that we don't even know how to deal with because it's been so yoked into our life and it's been sown, and we're dealing with things that we don't even know why we're dealing with, and we don't like what we do and we hate it, but I don't know how to stop it, and I can't tell anybody because if I tell the church, well, the church will just disown me and say, you should just stop doing it because that's what the church does. That's we, as a whole, as a church, have done. Someone comes in, sinful, you need to stop that. Okay, that's great. I would love to stop it. I don't even like doing it, but I can't stop. Because there's something below the surface that has a root in their life that has yoked them. Now, what happens with those things? What happens is it doesn't affect just you. Especially if you have a family. It affects everyone around you. And sometimes that wound that never healed, sometimes that root, that thing that you do that you don't know why you do it, you will sometimes lash out at those to cover it up. When you feel maybe they're getting too close to that spot, you immediately shift and put it onto something else. And sometimes you even project your own flaws into other people. And oftentimes what bugs you the most about other people is what you deal with. Why? Because you see in them what's inside you. You don't know that. But that thing that just irks you the most may be the thing that you need to be dealing with. And you can see it because that's part of you. No, Sister Susie, it's not because you talk too much. I know that's what you're thinking. That is not it. I do not struggle with that. That is for sure. I knew she was thinking that. I could read her mind. This happens in 12 years of marriage. What happened with that childhood? What happened with that child? That child takes on a pattern, and that pattern takes over its future. Right. If you were abused as a kid, statistically speaking, you yourself will be an abuser. Statistically speaking. Why? Your life has taken on that pattern of abuse. And because we don't know how to deal with it, that thing that was sown into our life often becomes what our life is about. We know the story regarding King Saul, the first king in Israel. All right, Saul. We know the Israelites wanted to be like all the other nations, so God eventually gave them their wish. And throughout Saul's tenure, he made a bad decision, another bad decision, and eventually we know God actually says that he regrets even making Saul a king. That's bad when God himself says, I made a mistake. That's bad. When he's like, you know what? I shouldn't have even done this. That's bad. So God tells Samuel, look, I found a new king. Brother Dave, you could come. I'm just about done. So God tells Samuel, look, I found a new king. So Samuel goes to Jesse's house and he anoints David, and David's to be the new king. That's what he's anointed for. Now, during the reign of Saul, David becomes best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. And David and Jonathan loved each other very much. They were best friends. I mean, they had a bond. They had a bond closer than what a son and a father had. Because there were times where Jonathan would tell David, look, hey, my dad's about to do this. You need to go somewhere. I love you too much. Okay, so their bond was closer than a son-father. So we know Jonathan eventually dies in battle, and Saul commits suicide. So now it's David's time to reign. It's time for all these years for David to finally take his place as the king. And because David loved God so much, and because his heart was so pure, he asked is there anybody still living in the house of Saul? Look, I love my God. David honored Saul as a man of God, regardless of how wicked he became. Now, this is very important because Pastor's talking about honor, right? So I'm going to throw in my little 2 cents with honor. Daniel honored Nebuchadnezzar. Go read Daniel. Daniel honored, as his king, Daniel honored Nebuchadnezzar. Even if he was a wicked king, but Daniel, as the authority over him, Daniel honored Nebuchadnezzar. The Bible even says in Jeremiah 25:9 that Nebuchadnezzar was a servant of God. Joseph honored Pharaoh. Pharaoh didn't believe in the one God. Pharaoh, the Egyptians had thousands of gods. So Joseph is under authority of Pharaoh, someone who doesn't believe the same thing as he does. But what did Joseph do? Joseph honored his king. A guy who had hundreds of gods honored his king. David, Saul tried to kill him multiple times. David even had the chance to kill him. And David's like, I cannot touch the anointed. I cannot touch the man. No matter how God even said that he regrets him being his king. But David honors his king so much that he refuses not to touch him. Now I'm about to get in it. People honoring their pastors even though he's wicked. Let's talk about it. The Bible clearly states it. See, we think, oh, because your pastor's not doing this, well, you just need to go. The Bible says to honor him. A pastor's going to make a mistake. Pastor may fall way off in left field, but your Bible still says to honor him. We have 3 examples: Joseph, Daniel, and Joseph, Daniel, and David. Honored wicked kings. Look, Nebuchadnezzar was so bad, his sons brought a bunch of people into the temple, fornicating, doing a bunch of stuff, and God, see, we think this is demonic, but God puts his finger and writes something on the wall. If we were to see that, we would think it was demonic. God did that. That's how wicked Nebuchadnezzar, but he still got honored. Doesn't matter if you have a wicked pastor or not. You guys don't. But I'm talking to not hundreds, not thousands, but I'm talking to a world, Facebook. You still honor your pastor. Period. And if God allows it, God will make a way on his time when he allows it for you to leave. But until that happens, you honor that pastor. So here we have David saying, look, I got to honor. My heart's too pure. I love God too much. I got to do something. Because if it wasn't for Jonathan, I wouldn't be here. Because Jonathan told me a lot of things. So because he loved Jonathan so much, Ziba gets summoned before King David. And David asks a question. And he says, hey, is there anybody in the house of Jonathan? I'd like to show kindness because of Jonathan's sake. And he says, well, I think so. I think there's still a son in Jonathan's house. And so I think so. And David actually asks the question again. And instead of Jonathan's sake, he actually says, for God's sake. So he reassured that, look, not only because of Jonathan, but because of God. So Ziba says, yeah, there's someone, there's this guy, he's lame in both feet, and he's living in Lodabar, and that's, to my knowledge, the last heir of his lineage. So David says, all right, I want you to go get him, and because I honor the people who are before me, I want to give him what is rightfully his. Now this whole, see, we reread over this whole thing, but this is very important. The important thing to understand the meaning behind names, okay? Mephibosheth means dispeller of shame. That's what his name means. Dispeller of shame. Lodabar means pastureless, or no word or no communication. So Debar, the second part of that word, normally means word or thing. But the prefix lo is a negatory. It's a negative. It makes what that would be a negative term, right? So now Mephibosheth is in a town with no communication. There's no pasture there. It's pastureless. So this town's name is not complimentary. You know, the name may be an apt of the description of how the town was, and it was lacking of everything because there was no pasture. There was no grass. There was nothing going forth, and it may have been insignificant, and a nothing town is what they kind of call it. In English, we might say it's in the middle of nowhere, right? This place there's nothing there. You would never want to move here, right? You can't raise cattle. It's dry. There's no grass. It's a terrible place. We don't even communicate with them. Sister Susie, 2 Samuel 4:4. And Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame of his feet. He was 5 years old when the tidings came of Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it came to pass, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame, as his name was Mephibosheth. How many people in your life, how many people is your life not working? How many people in here can't do something because someone you trusted dropped you? Someone who had authority over you, parent, guardian, whatever, someone dropped you when you were a child. Your life was entrusted in them to carry you. A pastor, a parent, a whatever. Someone was entrusted with your life, and you may have not even had a choice. Maybe you did have a choice, but something happened, and they dropped you. Now let's get into the mind of Mephibosheth here. Let's get into this mind, right? So we're in Mephibosheth's mind, and I can't walk because someone who I trusted dropped me. I'm living in a place where there's no communication. There is nothing growing. It's a dead place. I see no palace. I see no temple. I don't live like any royalty like my family did. I have a former king's blood inside me. They're coursing through my veins, but yet here I am, sitting lame in both feet, looking at a life that I can't stand. And it's shameless. Now there's a king that's not even the blood of Saul. He's not even my blood, sitting in a palace he doesn't deserve, getting the wealth he doesn't deserve, having power that's not his. And here am I, royalty flowing through my veins, and I'm in a place where nothing happens. What could have been? Oh, well, my life could have been this, my life. What if this person didn't drop me? Fact is, they did. So you can't go back and live a life of what ifs. But how often do we have that mindset, if it could have been not for A, B, and C, my life would be so much different. If that person didn't drop me, if time, land, honor, and family had all been lost, I wouldn't be here. If I would be in a palace. But I'm living nowhere what I feel I should be, and my name is true to itself, shameful. So Ziba goes and gets Mephibosheth and brings him to the king's request. And Mephibosheth gets to the palace, and the king tells him that because of what your father Jonathan, I'm going to restore everything to you that your grandfather Saul had. Because I honor what was his is going to be yours. Not only that, but you're always going to eat at the king's table now.
Yes, you are.
Now, Sister Susie, 2 Samuel 9 and 8, look at his response. This is Mephibosheth talking. And he bowed himself and said, what is thy servant that thou shouldest look upon such a dead dog as I am? Mephibosheth is now in a position. He is at the king's table. Yet he stays in the floor in a position and condition. He stays in that position because of his condition. He's now in the palace, nowhere close to Lodabar. He's at the king's table, but he still acts like he's living in Lodabar. Mephibosheth keeps the environment, his environment has changed. He has the opportunity now to get royalty, to get his royal identity, but holds on to his shame. He holds on to his old identity. What's our title? Keeping our old identity. King David did all he could do at this point. It was all up to Mephibosheth now. King David he's like, look, this is yours. And he says, why would you look upon this servant? I'm just a dead dog. Now, it's interesting because if you read after this, David never talks to Mephibosheth again. He talks to Ziba, and he blesses Ziba because of what Ziba has done. Now, at the end of this chapter, we do see that Mephibosheth stays in the palace and eats at the king's table. But he never recognized his identity at that moment. He stays in a bowed position, keeping his old, still thinking he's in a pastureless place, still thinking there's no communication, still letting his shameful name get a hold of him. God will bring us to a place where your name can be changed. He has positioned you at the royal table, but the question is, will you get off the floor and take your rightful place? You cannot live in your tomorrow while trying to go into your today. You can't go to your tomorrow while still holding on to your past. Your environment has changed. The position is right here. Your identity, your name change is right here. We've talked about it for now 7 lessons. But your condition does not let you sit and eat at the king's table. The king has offered himself to you. Your identity has been known. Your name change is right there. But you get to determine if you go and sit at the table.
There it is. That's good. That's good. That's really good.
Brother Dave, if you want to play for a little bit and Pastor can close me out, are you going to sit at the table? Are you going to hold on to your yesterday to go into your tomorrow? Because that won't happen. You have to let go of everything in order to get in your tomorrow. You have to let go of your old identity. You have to let go of categories, of labels. You cannot put yourself into what people have told you what you are. You put yourself into what God has told you.